there makers, it's Michelle with Fabric Funhouse again. Today we're going to have a little bit of a sew along. I want to walk you through making our Smithfield bag that we carry from Jen Fox Studios. It's a really easy pattern and it works so well with our cork fabric and wax canvas. Let's get started. Okay, so our version of this pattern today will be out of cork and wax canvas, of course. And again, this pattern is the Smithfield Bag by Jen Fox Studios. You can purchase that in the shop, and I'll link this in the description below, but it has piping all over it, as well as 2 exterior pockets. And the strap I'm going to figure out how to make later. I haven't decided if I'm going cork or wax canvas, but again, this is the pattern. And then normally pattern pieces will come looking more like this. I don't normally cut my patterns. What I normally do is trace them onto the tracing paper here. I will link this in the description below, but I do this to keep my pattern lasting longer. That way, if I cut several times, I don't have to repurchase the pattern. It just avoids that altogether. I have already chosen my colors, and I will be using this cork fabric in the color Brick. I'll probably need a large for the length of the straps I may cut in the future. I also have our Cypress green wax canvas and our true navy wax canvas right here. And then this is a print that is not yet released. It's coming very, very soon, but it's called Etched Floral. It's also in the color Brick, so it should match my brick cork fabric pretty seamlessly. I will tell you that I'm going to have to modify this a little bit. This piece is the only sample that we have of this print so far, and it is a little short for the pocket piece. So I am going to have to shorten it a little bit and also make sure that all the other pieces I have to cut will match that one. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is cut all of my pattern pieces out of their specific color. So this will be Cypress green, as well as having to cut some bias to make my own piping. And then this piece right here is the exterior on either side. I'll show you right here. So on the pattern, these 2 pieces right here are that pattern piece, and I'm going to use the true navy wax canvas for that. And then the back side of the exterior pocket will be the brick, and the etched floral will be the outside of the exterior pocket. There is another pocket on the back side, but since I have a limited amount of etched floral, I am going to go ahead and just use brick for that. Since it will have piping around the pocket, I think it'll break it up just nicely and you won't even really notice the difference, I hope. As far as the strap, I haven't made a decision yet. I think I'm going to wait until the body is completed and together before I make that decision, but I'll go over a few different ways to make the strap so that you can choose for yourself how you want to make yours. Now let's speed it up. I'm going to time lapse this so we can go a little faster. Because you can't pin cork fabric, I'm just going to use my sew tights. I like doing it this way when I'm cutting pieces because I can get close. Okay, I did want to slow it down here because it's calling for 4 pieces of this pattern piece to be your pocket. One is for the back side, one is for the outside for both pockets. I'm going to be cutting it out of brick cork fabric. However, you could, use a contrasting fabric in the wax canvas if you wanted to, or cotton. However, it'll be a less structured pocket. If I use the brick cork fabric right here, it definitely will be a more structured pocket, and I also avoid having to use interfacing, which keeps me from cutting so many things. One of the things I like about using sew tights is that I can actually shimmy a piece a little bit over if I need to. I don't have to completely repin. That saves me a little bit of time in the long run. So I've got my pocket pieces cut out, and now I'm cutting the exterior back part of the pocket, the middle of the bag basically. Since the piping around it will be a contrast color, I don't think it'll be too bad. It'll be broken up enough. All right, so what I'm trying to figure out here is how to angle this to cut my bias for the piping. The problem with this is it is a 60-inch yard. It's very large, but that's how it comes from the shop. So I'm having to maneuver it and figure out a way. As you can see here, marking wax canvas is super easy. I'm just using my turning tool to do it, but you can use a tracing wheel or even just your fingernail. The pattern pieces for the lining didn't have a grain line listed, so I just folded over what I had and used it that way. It just saved me a little fabric. Okay, and now there are some interior slip pockets that only list the size dimensions for the rectangles you need to cut. So I'm cutting those right here. And here I'm going to use my stick pins just to poke the holes to mark where the straps lay. And then you can use either the corner turner or the tracing wheel to trace around those. They're just squares, but it's easy to mark on wax canvas, which I really like. So the first couple of things I'm going to sew are the interior slip pockets and also the bias for my piping. To make the bias, you cut strips and then you actually put them perpendicular to each other and sew on a diagonal. Now I will tell you that I did sew one section of this bias incorrectly, so double check yourself before you start sewing, or if you get to that point, you can always pick it back with a seam ripper and start again, but I did not do that. So while we have a little time here, I thought that I might touch on what I'm sewing with. I'm sewing with a Singer Quantum Stylist. I'm using the Aurifil 40 weight thread that we carry in the shop, and I'm just using my regular 8-foot right now. Okay, so now that I'm done with the pockets, it's important to trim those to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and also to clip your corners right here so that when you turn it, there won't be a bunch in the points of the rectangle. Now I'm going to insert the cording into the piping. You basically can mark your center line like I'm doing here, which is super easy to do with wax canvas. Stick your cord in there, and then I'm going to clip it all the way down. I'm then going to take my zipper foot to be able to get the stitch as close as possible to the cording. So as you can see, little by little I'm working. I actually ran out of wonder clips and had to stop and then reinsert some cording here in just a second, you'll see. I will say that the edges of the piping, once it was finished, didn't really line up together. That was probably because I'm using wax canvas. It seems to be a little bit harder than it would be with, say, a cotton. But the plus side is they won't actually be showing anyway, so it really doesn't matter. Trim off that cording at the end, and now it's time to turn the pockets. Make sure that you have a turning tool or a chopstick and you get really good into those corners, but take your time. The more impatient you become with it, the more likely you're going to poke a hole in that corner. So just take your time. I'm going to put the piping in between the inside and outside of the pocket. The way that you do this is you basically sandwich it in between them right sides together. I'm also going to mark Some just decorative lines basically at the top of my interior slip pocket. They're just two straight lines and I mark them because I can't sew a straight line. Now that I've sewed the piping to the pocket, I'm going to flip the flaps, if you will, and go ahead and clip those to get that cork to try and lay down next to the piping for our next step. I'm also going to sew pretty much a decorative set of stitch rows on the top of my pocket just to set that apart. You could also do a decorative stitch if you want to. It's a lot easier to hide, by the way. Right here you can see the finished pocket, also my terrible rows that won't ever meet up with the stitches once we get to that point. So if anybody has a better way to do this, I'm all ears. This is probably one of the hardest things for me. Here's our finished cork fabric pocket with the piping. It will extend out over the sides for our next step. But it looks pretty good for my first time using piping. I'm pretty impressed. Now back to the table to put them next to the middle of the bag part, which is also going to be cork. I go ahead and clip those all together. And then I'm going to go back to the table and sew along the sides of the pocket. Just a basting stitch, but it's going to go all the way around to enclose that pocket. Kind of the same concept that we did before. You overreach with your piping on the sides, and then you're going to take your exterior sides that are also wax canvas and sandwich them where the piping's in the middle and the right sides are facing each other. Then you're going to sew with your zipper foot along that to get it as close to the cord as possible. I'm also at this time marking the center and putting my pockets onto the lining with sew tights. This was probably the hardest part for me, and probably the point where I realized I need to upgrade my sewing machine. As I'm going through this, it's very difficult to have the machine do the work for me. I'm having to do a lot of hand labor. I also took the darts and made those. I sewed them as well while I'm at the machine. It just takes one clip. And you can also mark those as well if you like with the wax canvas. And here are the pieces that we have finished so far. They are looking really nice and coming together. You can kind of see what the bag will now look like finished. This seems to be a good stopping place. Next time we will be adding our zipper closure, since that's the lining we cut, and figuring out which straps we want to put on the bag. And I'll teach you a couple different methods to do that. So stay tuned. We'll be back with a part 2 for the Smithfield bag.